I was terminated for using the restroom too often, and they had a spreadsheet to prove it. Management thought they saved a few dollars, but they actually torched a pending merger worth hundreds of millions. 48 hours later, legal had to answer a question that choked them. Did she leave voluntarily, or was she fired for her bladder when the board finally saw the tracking log? They understood the true cost. My name is Madeline Rivera, and at 9:26 on a Tuesday morning, the fluorescent lights of Calyx 9 Data Forge seemed to hum with a frequency that made my teeth ache. I had just returned to my desk, the ceramic warmth of my coffee mug still settling into my palm. When the internal messaging system pinged, it was a single, sterile line of text from Trevor Klein, the chief operating officer. "Come to my office, now." The "now" was not capitalized, but the lack of punctuation after it felt more aggressive than an exclamation point. I stood up, smoothing the front of my blazer. I was 36 years old, a senior compliance officer managing the most critical due diligence stream in the company's history. Yet I felt a sudden, juvenile spike of adrenaline. It was the kind of dread you feel when you are called to the principal's office, irrational and sticky. I walked past the rows of developers and data analysts, their faces illuminated by the cool blue glow of dual monitors. The office smelled of ozone, carpet cleaner, and the faint, stale scent of ambitious desperation. Trevor did not look up when I entered. He was a man who cultivated an image of intense productivity, usually by staring at spreadsheets that could have easily been handled by an intern. He gestured vaguely to the chair opposite his desk. I sat. The leather was cold. Without a word, Trevor reached into a drawer and pulled out a clipboard. He placed it on the desk with a deliberate, heavy thud that sounded like a judge bringing down a gavel. He spun it around so it faced me. I looked down. It was a printed spreadsheet, a grid of dates, times, and durations. For a moment, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. I saw my name at the top. I saw columns labeled exit and return. I saw cells highlighted in aggressive neon yellow. And then I saw the notes column. Restroom, it read, over and over again. Trevor leaned back, interlacing his fingers behind his head. The fabric of his expensive dress shirt pulled tight across his chest. He looked like a man who believed he was about to deliver a masterclass in management. "We have been tracking metrics. Madeline," he said. His voice was smooth, practiced, and entirely devoid of warmth. "Efficiency metrics." I stared at the paper. "Is this a log of my bathroom breaks?" "It is a log of time theft," Trevor corrected, his tone shifting into something patronizing. He leaned forward and tapped a specific entry with his index finger. "Tuesday, the 4th, 9 minutes. Thursday, the 6th, 7 minutes. Monday, the 10th, 8 minutes. You are averaging between 6 and 8 minutes per visit. Madeline, sometimes 3 times a day." I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving my skin cold. The humiliation was not hot. It was icy. "I drink water. Trevor, I am a human being with biological functions. Are we really having a meeting about this?" "At your salary tier," Trevor said, ignoring my question as he pulled a calculator closer to him. "Every minute you are not at your desk costs this company approximately $2.40 in direct compensation, not including overhead. When you aggregate these 6-minute intervals over a fiscal quarter, the loss is substantial." He spoke the numbers as if they were religious doctrine. $2.40, as if my value to the company could be sliced into 60-second increments and weighed on a scale. He looked at me with a disappointed shake of his head, like I was a vending machine that had swallowed his quarter without dispensing a soda. "I am managing the Hawthorne and Gage due diligence," I said, my voice steady despite the rapid thumping of my heart against my ribs. "I work through lunch. I answer emails at 10 at night. I saved the encryption protocol audit last week while I was home with a migraine. And you are counting the minutes I spend in the restroom." "Calyx 9 needs people with discipline," Trevor said. He picked up the clipboard and held it like a shield. "We are approaching a critical acquisition. We need focus. We need people who are at their desks, driving value, not wandering the halls. I am not wandering, I snapped. I am peeing. Trevor flinched slightly at the word, as if biology was a vulgarity in his sterilized corporate kingdom. The decision has been made. Madeline, we are terminating your employment effective immediately. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the hum of the HVAC system, a low mechanical drone that suddenly sounded like a countdown. Over bathroom breaks, I said. It was not a question. For excessive personal time during business hours and a failure to meet efficiency standards, Trevor recited, his eyes glazing over as he switched into legal defense mode. It is an at-will state. We do not need to elaborate further. I stood up. My knees felt strange, disconnected from the rest of my body. I want that in writing. I want the termination letter to say exactly why I am being fired. Trevor slid a manila envelope across the desk. He had it ready. Of course he had it ready. It is all standard language. Excessive personal time. We are not going to put the word bathroom in a legal document. Madeline, we are professionals. Professionals. The word hung in the air, heavy with irony. A professional who tracks the bladder habits of a senior compliance officer on a spreadsheet. Pack your things, Trevor said, turning his attention back to his monitors. Security is waiting outside to escort you. I took the envelope. I did not look at him again. There was no point. Trevor was not the disease. He was just a symptom of a rot that went all the way to the foundation. I walked out of his office. A uniformed security guard, a man I had nodded to every morning for 3 years, was standing by the door. He looked embarrassed. He stared at his shoes. I need to get my bag, I told him. He followed me to my desk. The walk felt miles long. Every click of my heels on the polished concrete floor sounded like an accusation. Heads turned. I could feel the eyes of my colleagues, junior analysts, project managers, the people I had mentored burning into my back. They knew something was happening. In an open-plan office, an escort by security is a public execution. I reached my desk. It looked exactly as I had left it 10 minutes ago. A snapshot of a life abruptly arrested. My coffee was still warm. My notebook was open to a page of scribbled notes about the SOC2 compliance gap analysis. I picked up the framed photograph of my nephew. Leo. He was 5 years old, grinning with a mouthful of missing teeth. I placed it in my tote bag. Next, I grabbed the small potted succulent that sat by my monitor. It was clinging to life, much like my enthusiasm for this job had been for the last 6 months. Finally, I took my coffee mug. It was a white ceramic cup with black text that read, "This meeting could have been an email." I looked at the computer screen one last time. The cursor was blinking in the password field of the secure data room. The Hawthorne and Gage acquisition was 41 days away from closing. It was a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The entire transaction hinged on the due diligence process, a massive, labyrinthine verification of every line of code, every contract, and every security protocol Calyx 9 possessed. And I was the gatekeeper. I was the only person who held the master administrative keys to the encrypted data room. I was the only one who understood the complex web of dependency between the legacy servers and the new cloud architecture. I was the specific point of contact listed in the governance agreement for all high-level security queries. Trevor saw a woman who spent 6 minutes in the bathroom. He did not see the architect of his company's survival. I could have written down the passwords. I could have transferred the admin rights to Holly, my second in command. I could have left a sticky note explaining where the updated compliance certificates were stored. I could have been the professional Trevor claimed to be. But then I remembered the spreadsheet. I remembered the neon yellow highlighter. I remembered the calculation of $2.40. I reached for the mouse, but the security guard took a step forward. "Ma'am, I cannot let you touch the equipment." I pulled my hand back. "Of course," I said. "Wouldn't want to steal any time." I dropped the mouse. I picked up my bag. I left the laptop closed. I left the encryption keys in a digital vault that only I could open. I left the chain of custody for 3 terabytes of sensitive data broken and unresolved. I left the audit trails, the risk assessments, and the client privacy agreements in a state of suspended animation. As the guard escorted me to the elevators, I did not look back. The glass doors slid shut, severing me from the cool, air-conditioned air of Calyx 9. I stepped out into the humid warmth of the parking lot. The sun was blinding. They thought they had just cut a cost. They thought they had trimmed fat. I unlocked my car and tossed my box of belongings onto the passenger seat. The succulent tipped over, spilling a little dirt onto the upholstery. I didn't care. They had no idea that they had just set fire to the only bridge leading to their future. And as I started the engine, a cold, hard knot of satisfaction tightened in my chest. I wasn't just leaving a job. I was leaving them to a darkness they didn't even know was coming. I did not go home. Going home would have felt like a retreat, and I was not retreating. I was merely regrouping. I drove 3 blocks down the street to a generic coffee chain, the kind with industrial lighting and music that was just loud enough to prevent eavesdropping. My hands were vibrating, a fine tremor that rattled the keys of my car as I pulled them from the ignition. It was not sorrow. It was the physical aftershock of having my livelihood severed by a man who looked at a spreadsheet and saw a thief instead of a dedicated employee. I ordered a large black coffee, steaming hot, mostly to give my hands something heavy and warm to hold on to. I found a small table in the back corner, facing the door, a habit I had picked up from working in risk management. Always know your exits. I opened my personal laptop. It was a sleek, silver machine, distinct from the clunky monitored brick I had just left on my desk at Calyx 9. I did not need access to the company servers to know exactly what was about to happen. I carried the architecture of their destruction in my head, because I was the one who had built the safety systems they relied on. The acquisition was the only thing that mattered to the board. Hawthorne and Gage Holdings, a massive publicly traded conglomerate, was in the final stages of purchasing Calyx 9. We were 41 days away from closing. The deal was valued at $350 million. For the founders and the investors, it was the exit strategy they had been salivating over for a decade. For the employees, it was a promise of stability that was currently hanging by a thread. I was the lead on the compliance and due diligence stream. In the world of mergers and acquisitions, this is not just paperwork, it is the structural integrity of the entire deal. Hawthorne and Gage were not buying our software. They were buying our data, our client list, and our security posture. If the security was flawed, the asset was worthless. I took a sip of the scalding coffee and opened a blank document. I began to type out a mental inventory of the landmines Trevor Klein had just stepped on. The central nervous system of this acquisition was the virtual data room. This was a secure, encrypted repository where we hosted thousands of sensitive documents for the Hawthorne and Gage auditors. Financial records, source code evaluations, and most critically, the client data privacy agreements. The problem for Calyx 9 was not just that they had locked me out. The problem was how the room was built. We utilized a dynamic encryption model that required a continuous chain of custody. Every document uploaded, every security certificate verified, and every risk assessment signed off on was tagged with a digital cryptographic signature tied to my specific user identity. I was not just a user, I was the root certificate authority for the compliance sector of the room. This was a feature I had insisted on to ensure accountability, to prove to auditors that no one could tamper with the files without a record. When Trevor terminated my employment, the IT department would have immediately disabled my Active Directory account. That was standard protocol, but they did not understand the dependency I had warned them about 6 months ago. By disabling my account during an active audit cycle, they broke the chain of trust. The moment the Hawthorne and Gage auditors tried to access the SOC2 reports that verified we were not leaking their future customers' credit card numbers, they would see a broken signature. They would see a user unknown or certificate revoked warning. In the high-stakes world of corporate acquisitions, a revoked security certificate on a compliance document is the equivalent of finding a dead body in the trunk of a car you are about to buy. It stops the conversation immediately. I stared at the blinking cursor. I remembered the meetings. I remembered sitting in the glass-walled conference room, explaining this exact risk to the chief technology officer and Trevor. I had told them, explicitly, that we needed a secondary compliance officer with parallel admin rights to establish a redundant chain of custody. I had told them that having a single point of failure for the data room was reckless. Trevor had looked at the budget. He had looked at me. He had said that hiring a deputy compliance officer was an unnecessary expense. He had said, "We trust you to stay healthy, Madeline." They trusted me to stay healthy, but they did not trust me to use the restroom. I checked the date on my laptop. We were in the middle of the Q&A phase. This is the most grueling part of due diligence. The buyer's legal team sends over hundreds of specific questions, demanding proof of our operations. There were 3 deadlines approaching in the next 72 hours. First, the management representation letter. This is a legal document where we swear that all information provided is true and complete. It required my signature as the compliance officer to validate the data security section. Without me, who signs it, Trevor? If Trevor signs it, he is committing fraud, because he has no visibility into the actual logs. If they don't sign it, the deal stalls. Second, the confirmation of the penetration test remediation. We had hired external hackers to attack our system 3 months ago. They found holes. I had managed the team that patched those holes. Hawthorne and Gage needed a signed attestation that the vulnerabilities were closed. The final report was in my personal encrypted folder on the company drive, a folder that required my biometric authentication to open. It could brute force it, maybe, but that would trigger a tamper alert in the logs. Third, the meeting with the Hawthorne and Gage Risk Committee. It was scheduled for Thursday. They wanted to grill the person responsible for data governance. They wanted to look that person in the eye and ask if the company was hiding any breaches. I was the only person who had ever answered their questions honestly. My counterpart at Hawthorne and Gage, a sharp woman named Marianne Quill, trusted me. She trusted me because I did not spin the truth. When our encryption was weak, I admitted it and laid out a plan to fix it. When our server latency was high, I showed her the charts. Now, when Marianne asks to speak to Madeline Rivera, she will be told that Madeline Rivera is no longer with the company. And naturally, her next question will be, why? Why would a company fire their lead compliance officer 41 days before a $350 million exit? There are only 2 answers, and both are fatal. Answer 1. She was incompetent or committed a serious ethical breach. If this is true, then every document she ever signed is suspect. The due diligence has to start over from scratch. The deal is delayed by months. The stock price tanks. Answer 2. The company is erratic, vindictive, and unstable. If this is true, the culture is toxic, and the post-merger integration will fail. The buyer walks away. There was no third option where Trevor explains that I peed too much. That was the beauty of it. The truth was so petty, so absurdly microscopic, that they could never say it out loud to a billion-dollar acquirer. They would have to lie. And once they started lying to the auditors, they were stepping into a trap that I didn't even have to set. I took a screenshot of my calendar on my personal laptop. I had synced it with my work calendar days ago. A habit of personal organization that now served as evidence. I had the invites for the meetings I was supposed to lead. I saved them to a secure cloud drive. I also saved a copy of my most recent performance review, which I had forwarded to my personal email 2 weeks prior. Exceeds expectations, it read. Madeline is a cornerstone of the acquisition team. That document, dated 14 days ago, would be the knife that cut through whatever story they tried to invent. I closed the laptop. The lid clicked shut with a satisfying finality. I did not feel the need to send an email. I did not feel the need to warn Holly, my product operations colleague. Though I felt a pang of sympathy for the chaos she was about to inherit, I could not help them. Any contact from me now would look like sabotage. The most damaging thing I could do was exactly what they had ordered me to do. I would leave. I would be silent. I would disappear. I finished my coffee, which had turned lukewarm and bitter. I stood up and walked out of the cafe. The sun was still shining. The world was still turning, and 3 blocks away, at Calyx 9 Data Forge, the servers were humming along, processing data, completely unaware that their master key had just walked out the door and was never coming back. They wanted to save $2.40 a minute. They were about to learn the difference between price and value. The countdown had already begun, and the first domino was likely falling right about now. My access to the corporate network died at 10:14 in the morning. It was not a flicker or a glitch. It was a guillotine. One moment, I was staring at the login screen on my phone, and the next, the session token expired. The digital doors slammed shut with a finality that felt almost physical. They had wiped me from the system in under an hour. It was the most efficient thing the IT department had done in 3 years. I was sitting in my living room, surrounded by the silence of a house that was not used to having me in it on a Tuesday. I watched the notifications on my phone screen. They were the only lifeline I had left to the world I had just been exiled from. Then came the screenshot. It was sent by Holly Serrano, the head of product operations, and one of the few people at Calyx 9 who understood that deadlines were mathematical facts, not suggestions. She did not send a text first. She just sent the image. It was a capture of the general announcement channel on Slack. Trevor Klein had posted it 4 minutes after my email went dark. Team, Madeline Rivera has decided to leave Calyx 9 effective immediately to attend to personal matters. We thank her for her contributions and wish her the best in her future endeavors. All compliance queries should be directed to me until further notice. I stared at the phrase, personal matters. It is the corporate equivalent of a shroud. It is the polite, sanitized rug under which companies sweep the bodies of the people they find inconvenient. It suggests a family crisis, a mental health breakdown, or a sudden desire to travel the world. It suggests that the problem lies entirely with the employee. It implies that the bladder is a lifestyle choice, a whimsical hobby that I had decided to pursue full-time, rather than a biological necessity. Holly's text followed a second later. Madeline, what is going on? People are whispering that security escorted you out. Trevor looks like he just swallowed a lemon. I looked at the message. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to type the truth. I wanted to say, I was fired because Trevor has a spreadsheet of my bathroom habits and thinks $2.40 is worth more than the acquisition. I wanted to burn the building down with a single sentence, but I didn't. I set the phone down on the coffee table. Silence is a weapon. In the world of compliance and legal risk, the person who speaks first usually loses. If I started ranting to colleagues, I would look unstable. I would look like the emotional woman Trevor probably wanted to paint me as. If I stayed silent, I became a mystery. And in the middle of a $350 million due diligence process, a mystery is terrifying. The first 72 hours were eerie. It was the kind of quiet you experience in the seconds before a roof beam snaps under the weight of snow. The house was still standing, but the physics had already shifted. I did not sit around crying. I treated my unemployment like a project. I updated my CV, stripping away the emotional residue of Calyx 9 and highlighting the metrics that actually mattered. Managed SOC 2 Type 2 certification. Lead diligence officer for enterprise acquisition readiness. 0 critical non-compliance findings in 12 consecutive quarters. I reached out to 3 headhunters I had known for years. I did not tell them I was fired. I told them I was exploring the market due to strategic divergences. It was corporate speak for, my boss is an idiot, and they understood it fluently. By Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. It was not a headhunter. It was the internal talent acquisition lead for Red Mason Systems. Red Mason was our direct competitor. They were aggressive, well-funded, and currently eating Calyx 9's market share in the enterprise sector. Madeline, the recruiter said, her voice bright and professional. We heard a rumor you might be on the market. We have been trying to figure out who was keeping Calyx 9's data governance so tight. We would love to buy you lunch. They did not want to buy me lunch. They wanted to pick my brain. They wanted to know why the compliance officer of a rival company would leave weeks before a massive buyout. I am available for a conversation, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Great, she said. We are scaling our MA team. We need someone who understands the pressure of a live deal, Someone who doesn't cut corners. The irony was so sharp it almost cut me. Calyx 9 fired me for time theft, and their biggest rival was calling me because they knew I did the work. While I was scheduling interviews, I knew exactly what was happening inside the glass walls of my former office. I did not need a spy to tell me. I could see the email chains in my mind as clearly as if I were CC'd on them. The Hawthorne and Gage team, the buyers were meticulous. They were currently in the deep dive phase. This is the part where they stop looking at the summaries and start opening the actual files. They would be sending emails to Compliance Calyx 9, com. Those emails would now be forwarding to Trevor, a man whose understanding of data privacy laws was limited to what he could skim from a Wikipedia article, would be trying to answer them. I could imagine the exchange. Buyer. Please clarify the encryption key rotation schedule for the European user base as per GDPR Article 32, Trevor. We follow all standard protocols and ensure high security. Buyer. That is not an answer. We need the logs. We need the specific timestamps of the last 3 rotations, and we need the sign-off from the data protection officer. Trevor. We can provide that later. And then, the silence from the buyer. The long, heavy pause that screams danger. I knew, with absolute certainty, that by Friday morning, the inbox at Calyx 9 contained a message that looked something like this. We are not comfortable with these vague responses. We need Madeline Rivera in the loop. I understood why. It wasn't because I was a genius. It wasn't because I was charming. It was because for 18 months, I was the only person who told them the truth. When our server latency spiked last November, the CTO wanted to hide it in the averages. I refused. I marked it as a risk in the monthly report and added a mitigation plan. When the buyer's auditors saw that report, they didn't panic about the latency. They relaxed. They realized they were dealing with an honest broker. In high-stakes finance, nobody expects perfection. Technology breaks. Code has bugs. People make mistakes. Investors can handle bad news. They can price in a risk. They can insure against a flaw. What they cannot handle is a lie. Trevor did not understand this. He thought the deal was about the product. He thought it was about the revenue charts and the growth projections. He thought he could fire the person who pointed out the cracks in the foundation and just paint over them. But a due diligence process is an interrogation. And the moment the person answering the questions changes from a precise, honest expert to a vague, sweating executive, the interrogators don't just stop, they bring in the bright lights. I sat in my kitchen, sipping tea, looking at the rain against the window. I felt a strange sense of calm. I was not the one who had to explain why the chain of custody was broken. I was not the one who had to explain why the personal reasons for my departure coincided exactly with the final risk assessment deadline. They thought they had removed an inefficiency. They thought they had solved a math problem involving minutes and dollars. What they had actually done was remove the load-bearing wall of their credibility. Holly texted me again on Friday evening. Trevor is shouting at legal. Something about the data room logs. It sounds bad. I didn't reply. I didn't have to. The silence was doing the work for me. The machine was starting to eat itself, and all I had to do was watch. On the 4th day of my involuntary retirement, the phone rang. It was not a recruiter, and it was not a headhunter. It was Holly Serrano. When I answered, there was no greeting. There was only the sound of someone calling from inside a burning building, trying to whisper so the fire would not hear them. They cannot get into the data room, Holly said. Her voice was tight, squeezed thin by stress. The Hawthorne and Gage team tried to access the intellectual property folders at 9 this morning. Access denied. They called Trevor. Trevor called AT. AT reset the permissions. Access still denied. Madeline, the entire repository is locked down. I sat at my kitchen table, watching steam rise from a cup of herbal tea. I felt a phantom twitch in my fingers, the muscle memory of a sysadmin wanting to reach for a keyboard to fix the problem, but I kept my hands wrapped around the warm ceramic. Of course it is locked down, I said calmly. Tell me exactly what it did. They panicked. Holly said, when the password reset failed, The new sysadmin, that guy Jason they hired last month, tried to force a permission override. He went into the back end of the server and tried to reassign the root ownership of your folders to Trevor's account. I closed my eyes and let out a long, slow breath. He tried to hot swap the root certificate authority on a live diligence vault. Yes. And what happened? The screen turned red. Holly whispered. A big, flashing box popped up. Tamper alert. Integrity violation. It locked the whole system. Now nobody can get in. Not even IT. It says the encryption keys have been suspended pending security review. I took a sip of tea. It tasted like justice. The reason was simple, brutal, and entirely mathematical. It was a mechanism I had designed to protect the company, and now, it was the weapon that was dismantling it. The data room was not just a folder on a hard drive. It was a secure, encrypted ecosystem designed to prove chain of custody. Every document inside that room was wrapped in a digital envelope signed with my cryptographic identity. My account was the trust anchor. I had set it up so that any attempt to modify the ownership of the files without my specific digital handshake would be interpreted by the system as a hostile hack. When Trevor fired me, he had disable my account to stop me from stealing data. He thought he was closing a door. He didn't realize he was actually blowing up the bridge while the cargo train was still on it. By killing my user ID, he severed the chain of trust. The documents were still there, but the digital key needed to read them had been revoked. And when Jason, the incompetent replacement, tried to force the lock with a crowbar by swapping the owner to Trevor, the system did exactly what I had programmed it to do. It assumed Calyx 9 was under attack. It assumed a rogue actor was trying to hijack the deal data. So, it engaged the kill switch. It gets worse. Holly continued, her voice trembling. The tamper alert didn't just flash on our screens. It sent an automated notification to every registered viewer of the data room. My eyes snapped open. The buyer got the alert, yes. Marianne Quill called 10 minutes ago. She was not happy. She asked why the integrity of the data room was compromised. She asked if we were altering documents retroactively. I could imagine the scene in the Calyx 9 conference room, the smell of nervous sweat, the frantic typing. Trevor's face turning that blotchy shade of purple he gets when he loses control. What did legal say? I asked. Legal is running around like headless chickens. Holly said, they tried to tell Marianne that it was just an administrative change. They asked if we could just create a new data room and re-upload everything with a new administrator. They wanted to start fresh. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. You cannot just start fresh in the middle of due diligence. Holly, you know that. Marianne knows it too. Holly said. She told them that if we change the administrator now, after a tamper alert, the entire audit trail is void. She said if we move the files, they have to re-verify every single document timestamp. She said it would push the closing date back by at least 3 weeks. And she said something else. Holly paused. I could hear the background noise of the office behind her shouting. Phones ringing. The chaotic symphony of a crisis. What did she say? She asked why the administrator was being changed at all. She asked, very specifically, why did the person holding the keys leave the building 4 weeks before closing? This was the question that cut through the technical jargon and struck the nerve. A data room glitch is an annoyance. A missing key executive is a red flag. A missing key executive combined with a security lockdown is a siren screaming fraud. What did Trevor tell her? I asked. He tried to brush it off. Holly said. He put on his sales voice. You know the one. He said, it is just a technical glitch. Marianne, just a standard transition of duties. Nothing to worry about. We are optimizing our internal resource allocation. Optimizing internal resource allocation. I repeated. That is a lot of syllables for, we fired her. Marianne didn't buy it. Holly said. She asked for the incident log. She wants to see exactly what command triggered the lockout. And Madeline, Trevor is terrified. He should be. He called a manager meeting 10 minutes ago. Holly said, her voice dropping even lower. He closed the blinds. He looked everyone in the eye and gave us a direct order. He said that under no circumstances is anyone allowed to mention the spreadsheet. He said if anyone mentions the bathroom logs to the buyer or to the auditors, or even to each other. They will be terminated for breach of confidentiality. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. It wasn't fear for myself. It was the realization of how deep the rot went. Trevor knew. He knew exactly how ridiculous, how petty, and how defenseless his position was. He knew that if Hawthorne and Gage found out that the multi-million-dollar merger was currently frozen because he was counting the minutes I spent urinating, he would be laughed out of the industry. He would be unhireable. The bathroom spreadsheet was no longer just a management tool. It was now evidence of gross negligence. It was the smoking gun that proved the management team prioritized micromanagement over the security of the deal. He is trying to bury it. I said, he is trying to turn a wrongful termination based on biological discrimination into a vague technical mystery. People are scared. Madeline, Holly said, they are scared of losing their jobs. But they are also angry. We can't work. The developers can't push code because the compliance check is part of the deployment pipeline. And the pipeline is broken because you're gone. The sales team can't pull contracts. Everything is stuck. Holly, I said, my voice hardening. Listen to me very carefully. I'm listening. Do not say a word. Do not try to fix the data room. Do not try to help Jason. And do not, under any circumstances, talk to Trevor about the spreadsheet. Why? Because this is not an IT problem anymore, I said. The moment that tamper alert went off, and the moment Trevor issued a gag order to cover up the cause, this stopped being a technical glitch. It became a legal liability. It became a cover-up. You think the deal is going to die, don't you? Holly asked. She sounded small. I think the deal is already dead. I said, they just haven't signed the death certificate yet. The body is still warm. But the heart stopped beating on Tuesday morning at 9:26. I miss you, Holly said unexpectedly. The office feels hostile. Get your resume ready. I told her. And Holly, if Marianne Quill or anyone from her team contacts you directly, do not lie. You do not have to volunteer the truth. But do not lie for Trevor. He is not worth a perjury charge. Okay, she said. Okay, I have to go. Trevor is walking down the aisle. The line went dead. I put the phone down. I looked at the black screen of my laptop. I could picture the data room console right now. It would be a wall of grayed-out folders with a red banner across the top. System locked. Contact administrator. They couldn't contact the administrator. The administrator was sitting in her kitchen, wearing yoga pants, watching the rain, and waiting for the inevitable explosion. Trevor thought he could bully the software like he bullied his employees. He thought he could intimidate the encryption algorithms, but math does not care about your title. Math does not care about your quarterly goals. Math only cares about the key, and I took the key with me. The silence in my house felt different now. It wasn't empty. It was heavy with anticipation. The first crack had appeared in the dam. The water was starting to seep through. It would start as a trickle, a few blocked files, a few angry emails, but soon, the pressure would build. The timeline was ticking. 41 days to close, minus 4 days, 37 days left, and they were locked out. I stood up and poured the rest of my tea into the sink. The liquid swirled down the drain, disappearing into the darkness. They wanted to monitor my flow. Fine. Now they could watch their own cash flow choke, sputter, and die. The domino effect is rarely instantaneous. In the movies, you push the first tile and the entire pattern collapses in seconds. In the corporate world, it is a slow, grinding friction. It is the sound of contracts being reshuffled, meetings being canceled, and the distinct, metallic taste of anxiety filling the air conditioning vents. The week following the data room lockout, the external reality began to catch up with the internal chaos. It started with the customers. Calyx 9 had 2 massive enterprise clients, the kind of whales that justified the $350 million valuation. One was a logistics giant, and the other was a healthcare provider. Both were in the middle of negotiating scope expansions addendums to their contracts that would have added nearly $4 million in annual recurring revenue. These upsells were the cherry on top of the acquisition sundae. They were the proof of growth that Hawthorne and Gage needed to see. On Tuesday morning, the logistics giant sent a formal letter to the chief revenue officer. They were pausing the expansion. They cited uncertainty regarding data governance stability and requested a hold on all new data ingestion until the compliance officer role was stabilized and verified. 2 hours later, the healthcare provider followed suit. Their legal team was even more blunt. They invoked a clause in our master services agreement regarding material adverse changes to personnel. They demanded a written confirmation that the chain of custody for their patient data had not been compromised by the recent administrative restructure. That phrase again, administrative restructure. The polite lie Trevor was trying to sell the world, but the world was not buying it. These letters were not cancellations. They were freezes, and in the middle of an acquisition, a freeze is almost as deadly as a fire. It meant the revenue projections for the next quarter were suddenly imaginary. It meant the numbers Trevor had presented to the board were now lies. I sat in my apartment, watching the rain streak the windows, fielding calls from Red Mason Systems. They were flying me out for a final interview on Monday. They talked about salary packages and equity vesting schedules. They treated me like an asset. Meanwhile, my former employer was treating me like a ghost they couldn't exorcise. Then came the second blow. This one did not come from clients. It came from the buyer. Hawthorne and Gage sent over a document titled Supplementary Due Diligence Request Human Resources and Internal Controls. Holly leaked the contents to me via a disappearing message app on her personal phone. She didn't send the file, just a summary of the panic it caused. The buyer's auditors had moved past the technical specs. They were now looking at culture. They had likely heard the rumors the industry is small, and compliance officers talk. They knew something smelled wrong about my sudden departure. The questionnaire contained 20 questions. Most were standard. Please list all active litigation. Please confirm severance policies. But question number 14 was a sniper shot. Please disclose all methods, software, or manual tracking systems used to monitor employee productivity, including but not limited to keystroke loggers, webcam activation, or the tracking of biological functions and non-work-related breaks. Provide policy documents supporting these practices. Holly told me that when Trevor read that question, he went pale. He had no policy document. There was no standard operating procedure for bathroom frequency. There was no urine output optimization strategy in the employee handbook. There was only the spreadsheet. There was only a crude, vindictive Excel file where a chief operating officer had manually entered the minutes a 36-year-old woman spent in a toilet stall. If they answered, "No, we do not track biological functions," they would be lying. If the spreadsheet ever surfaced during discovery for a wrongful termination suit, which any competent lawyer would file, that lie would become securities fraud. They would be misleading an investor about internal controls. If they answered yes, they would have to produce the policy. They would have to explain to a modern, progressive conglomerate that Calyx 9 operated like a Victorian workhouse. Holly described the scene in the executive conference room. The head of HR was arguing with Trevor. She was trying to draft a neutral response. She suggested phrases like granular time management analysis and facility utilization metrics, but you cannot dress up a bathroom log. No matter how many syllables you use, it is still a list of potty breaks. The tension inside the office began to curdle into toxicity. The internal Slack channels, usually filled with memes and project updates, went silent. People were moving to private group chats. The engineers were furious because their stock options, their ticket to a down payment on a house, or a new car, or a wedding were tied to the deal closing. They saw the freeze letters. They saw the panic in the C-suite. They realized that the payout they had been banking on was evaporating, and they started looking for someone to blame. Initially, Trevor tried to point the finger at me. He spun a narrative that I had left the company in a lurch, that I had refused to hand over credentials, that I was being vindictive, but engineers are logical people. They look at inputs and outputs. They saw that the data room locked after I left, because IT tried to hack it. They saw that the clients froze the contracts because the company couldn't verify compliance. They realized that the common denominator was not Madeline Rivera. It was the management that fired her. On Thursday afternoon, I received a text from a director of sales named Greg. Greg was a nice enough guy. The kind who brought donuts on Fridays and always asked about your weekend. He had a mortgage and 2 kids in private school. He needed this deal to close. Madeline, the text read, I know things ended badly, but we are really hurting here. The Vanguard deal is stuck. Can you just jump on a quick call with IT and help them unlock the certs? Just as a favor. Be the bigger person here. There are a lot of innocent families depending on this buyout. I stared at the screen. Be the bigger person. It is the classic plea of the enabler. When the system breaks because of its own corruption, they always ask the victim to fix it for the sake of the innocent. They ask you to swallow your dignity, to forget the humiliation, to ignore the fact that they stood by and watched while you were escorted out by security. Greg hadn't texted me when I was fired. He hadn't asked if I was okay when Trevor humiliated me. He was only texting me now because his commission check was in danger. I did not reply. I am a good person. I pay my taxes. I hold the door for strangers. I do my job with integrity. But being a good person does not mean being a doormat for a company that tracks my bladder capacity. Being a good person does not mean helping a man who cost-analyzed my humanity save his multi-million-dollar bonus. I deleted the thread. I was not burning the village. I had simply stopped carrying the water buckets for the arsonist. Friday morning arrived with a heavy gray sky. The deadline for the supplementary due diligence response was noon. Trevor and the legal team were undoubtedly sweating over question 14, trying to figure out how to say, "We track bathroom breaks," without sounding insane. I was making toast when my phone chimed. It was not a text. It was an email notification. I glanced at the screen, expecting another recruiter or perhaps a spam message. My heart skipped a beat. The sender was Marianne Quill. Marianne Quill, the lead risk advisor for Hawthorne and Gage, the woman who was effectively the judge, jury, and executioner of the acquisition. She had not emailed my old work address. She had not emailed Trevor. She had emailed my personal Gmail account. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel and picked up the phone. I unlocked it and opened the mail app. The subject line was 3 words, stark and terrifyingly direct. Confidential inquiry. Termination. I stood there in my kitchen, the smell of burnt toast filling the air, and I realized that the wall had been breached. The buyer wasn't just asking questions anymore. They were investigating. I opened the email. It was short, it was professional, and it was the signal that the endgame had officially begun. Dear Ms. Rivera, it began. I hope this email finds you well. We have been informed by Calyx 9 management that you departed for personal reasons. However, during our review of the internal control logs, we have noted several inconsistencies regarding the timeline of your access revocation and the subsequent system alerts. We need to verify the circumstances of your departure to close our risk assessment of the corporate culture. Can you please confirm if your resignation was voluntary? I looked at the words on the screen. Can you please confirm if your resignation was voluntary? Trevor had told them I quit. He had lied to the auditors. He had lied to the investors. He had bet everything on the hope that I would stay silent, that I would be too ashamed or too professional to contradict him. He had forgotten the one rule of compliance that I had preached for 3 years. Documentation is everything. I sat down at the table. I did not reply immediately. I let the email sit there, glowing on the screen. This was not revenge. Revenge is emotional. Revenge is messy. This was due diligence, and I was about to provide the most accurate, data-backed response of my career. The email from Marianne Quill sat open on my laptop screen, a block of black text against a stark white background. It was not aggressive. It did not use capital letters to scream or bold fonts to threaten. It was terrifyingly polite. It was the kind of email that costs $500 an hour to draft because every word had been weighed, measured, and sharpened by a legal team before being sent. Dear Ms. Rivera, it read. In the course of our standard personnel audit regarding key stakeholders in the acquisition, we have noted a discrepancy in the records provided by Calyx 9 Data Forge. Management has classified your departure as a voluntary resignation due to personal matters. However, given the abrupt nature of the exit and the subsequent triggering of security protocols, we are conducting an independent verification. We simply need to clarify one point for our risk assessment files. Did you resign voluntarily, or was your employment terminated, if it was the latter? Please provide the official reason given. I leaned back in my chair. The house was quiet. Save for the hum of the refrigerator, this was the trap. Marianne was not asking because she cared about my feelings. She was asking because she had found a loose thread in the sweater Trevor was trying to sell her, and she was pulling on it to see if the whole garment would unravel. If I answered that I resigned, I would be validating Trevor's lie. I would be helping him cover up the incompetence that was currently jeopardizing the deal. But if I ranted, if I wrote paragraphs about how unfair it was, how Trevor was a misogynist, how the company was a sweatshop, I would look unstable. I would look like a disgruntled ex-employee trying to sabotage a deal out of spite. Marianne would read a lying, emotional email and file it under unreliable witness. In the world of compliance, emotion is noise, data is signal. I needed to send her a signal so clear it would shatter glass. I opened the Finder window on my laptop. I navigated to a folder I had named Insurance. Inside, there were 2 files. The first was a PDF of the termination letter Trevor had slid across his desk. It was dry, vague, and legally sanitized. It cited excessive personal time and failure to adhere to efficiency standards. It was the shield Trevor had built for himself. He thought that phrase was bulletproof because it didn't say the word bathroom. The second file was a JPEG image. I opened it. The quality was poor. It was blurry. Taken hastily with a shaking hand while a security guard stood 3 feet away, the angle was skewed, but the content was legible. It was the clipboard. In the harsh fluorescent light of Trevor's office, the neon yellow highlighter marks glowed like radioactive waste. You could clearly see my name at the top. You could see the columns, and most damning of all, you could see the handwritten notes in the margins. Restroom, 6 minutes. Restroom, 8 minutes. Frequency concern. And right at the bottom, circled in red ink, was a calculation. Weekly loss, 112 minutes. I looked at the photo. It was ugly. It was humiliating. It was the visual definition of petty tyranny, but it was also the truth. I hit reply on Marianne's email. I did not write a greeting. I did not write a conclusion. I did not thank her for reaching out. I simply attached the 2 files. Then, I typed a single sentence. I was terminated for what management deemed a lack of discipline regarding the frequency of my restroom usage. I read it twice. It was clinical. It was precise. It sounded absolutely insane, which was perfect, because it forced the recipient to look at the attachments to verify if I was joking. I pressed send. The email swooshed away, carrying the weight of my career and Trevor's reputation with it. I sat there, staring at the screen. My heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm. I wondered if I had just made a mistake. Maybe this was too much. Maybe this was unprofessional. Maybe Marianne would look at the bathroom log and think I was the one who was crazy for saving it. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. I drank it standing up, looking out at the street. A neighbor was walking his dog. A delivery truck rumbled by. The world was continuing on, completely unaware that in a high-rise office 3 miles away, a bomb was about to go off in the inbox of a corporate lawyer. 20 minutes passed. My laptop chimed. I walked back to the table. The reply was from Marianne. It was even shorter than her first message. Received. Thank you. Ms. Rivera, this information and the accompanying documentation are material to our evaluation. They directly impact our assessment of corporate governance and the cultural viability of this merger. Cultural viability. That was the polite corporate term for, we do not want to buy a company run by lunatics. I closed the laptop. I didn't need to do anything else. The grenade had been thrown. The pin was on the floor. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of mundane tasks. I did laundry. I watered my plants. I tried to read a book. but my eyes kept sliding off the page. I was waiting for the shockwave. It arrived at 7:30 in the evening. My phone lit up with a message from Holly. "You will not believe what just happened." I picked up the phone. "Try me." Marianne called an emergency meeting with the board at 5 o'clock. Not the management team, the board. She demanded that the chairman be present. And Trevor tried to start the meeting. Holly texted. He had his slides ready. He was going to talk about the technical recovery plan for the data room. Marianne cut him off before he could get past the title slide. I could see it. I could see Marianne, in her tailored suit, sitting at the head of the table, her face like stone. She told him to sit down, Holly continued. She said that in light of new evidence regarding internal controls and personnel management, the buyer no longer had confidence in the current operational leadership's ability to provide objective data. She actually used the words integrity deficit. Integrity deficit. It was a beautiful phrase. She banned him from speaking. I typed. She requested that he leave the room for the duration of the audit discussion. Holly replied, Madeline. She kicked him out of his own acquisition meeting. He looked like he was going to vomit. He gathered his papers and walked out. The chairman looked furious, not at Marianne, at Trevor. I set the phone down on the couch. I thought I would feel triumphant. I thought I would feel a surge of vindictive joy, the kind you see in movies where the hero watches the villain fall off a cliff. But I didn't feel joy. I felt a profound, exhausting relief. For weeks, Trevor had made me feel like I was the problem. He had made me feel like my body was a defect, like my need to step away from my desk was a moral failing. He had reduced my professional worth to a calculation of minutes and dollars. He had gaslit me into thinking I was stealing from the company. Now, a neutral third party, a woman whose job was to assess value, had looked at his spreadsheet and made a different calculation. She had calculated that Trevor was the liability. I looked at the blurry photo of the clipboard still open on my screen. That piece of paper was supposed to be my shame. It was supposed to be the evidence of my inefficiency. Instead, it had become the evidence of their cruelty. This wasn't revenge. Revenge implies that I did something to hurt them. I hadn't done anything. I hadn't hacked their servers. I hadn't leaked their trade secrets to the press. I hadn't poached their clients. All I did was tell the truth. I realized then that systems built on lies are incredibly fragile. They require constant maintenance. They require everyone to play along, to nod and agree that the sky is green and that bathroom breaks are theft. It takes so much energy to hold a lie like that together. All it took to break it was one email and one photo. Holly texted again. They are asking for the raw logs from the security cameras now. Marianne wants to match the timestamps on your bathroom spreadsheet with the video feed to prove he was stalking you. It's over. Madeline. He is done. I didn't reply to Holly. I turned off my phone. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Trevor was probably sitting in his car, gripping the steering wheel, wondering how it all went wrong. He probably still blamed me. He probably thought I was a vindictive witch who couldn't take a joke. He would never understand that he hadn't been taken down by a mastermind. He had been taken down by the inevitable result of treating people like components. I turned off the lights in the living room. For the first time in a month, my chest didn't feel tight. The air in the room felt lighter. I was unemployed. I was uncertain about the future. But I was right. And in the high-stakes world of due diligence, being right is the only currency that matters. My phone vibrated against the mahogany table of the Red Mason Systems conference room for the third time in 40 minutes. It was a persistent, angry buzz that I could feel through the leather of my portfolio. I ignored it. Across from me, the vice president of engineering at Red Mason was outlining their data governance roadmap for the next fiscal year. He was a man named David, who spoke about compliance not as a bureaucratic hurdle, but as a competitive advantage. We want to build a fortress, David said, leaning forward. We have the technology, Madeline, but we need someone who understands the architecture of trust, someone who can look a regulator in the eye and know exactly where every byte of data lives. My phone buzzed again, a fourth time. "I apologize," I said, reaching into my bag and silencing the device without looking at the screen. "Popularity is a curse." David laughed. "If that is Calyx 9 trying to claw you back, tell them they had their chance." He did not know how right he was. The interview concluded 10 minutes later. It was the kind of meeting where the air in the room feels energized, where sentences are finished by the other person because you are speaking the same professional language. As we shook hands, David slid a folder across the table. "We usually wait 24 hours to process feedback," he said, "but given the market conditions and what we have seen today, I am authorized to skip the formalities. This is a preliminary offer." I opened the folder. The base salary was 30% higher than what I had been making at Calyx 9. The equity package was generous. The title was Director of Trust and Safety. I looked up at him. "I have one question. It might sound strange." "Go ahead." Does Red Mason utilize any granular productivity tracking software? Specifically, do you log time away from keyboard for biological necessities? David looked at me, then at the HR representative sitting next to him. They both chuckled. "You mean, do we count your bathroom breaks?" David asked, grinning. "Madeline, we hire adults. As long as the work gets done and the audits pass. I do not care if you work from the moon. Who tracks bathroom breaks?" "That sounds like a prison, not a tech company." "You would be surprised," I said, forcing a smile. "Thank you. I will review this tonight." I walked out of the building and into the bright, sharp sunlight of the parking lot. I sat in my car, took a deep breath of the air that smelled of freedom and exhaust fumes, and finally looked at my phone. 5 missed calls, all from Trevor Klein, 3 voicemails. I played them in chronological order. It was a fascinating case study in the decomposition of an ego. The first message, left at 10:15, was brisk. "Madeline, this is Trevor. Pick up. We have a situation with the Q&A log. I need you to clarify a few file structures. Call me back immediately." He was still playing the boss. He still thought he could snap his fingers and I would jump, simply because he was used to me jumping. The second message, left at 10:32, was tighter. The briskness had been replaced by a subtle tremor of anxiety. "Madeline, the buyer is asking questions about the admin privileges. Legal is involved. You need to explain to them that this is a standard handover. I cannot cover for you if you do not give me the information." Cover for me. The audacity was breathtaking. He was drowning. And he was graciously offering to hold my head under the water with him. The third message, left just as I was shaking David's hand, was the one that made me lean back against the headrest. "Madeline." Trevor's voice cracked. He sounded exhausted. "Please, pick up the phone. We can fix this. We can work something out. Let us talk like adults." I deleted the messages. Talk like adults. This from the man who had handed me a clipboard with my urination frequency highlighted in neon yellow. My phone pinged with a text message. It was Trevor again. He had moved from voice to text, desperate for any channel that might penetrate my silence. "You are ruining this company." I stared at the words. I was not ruining anything. I was sitting in a sedan, holding a job offer from a superior competitor. I had not touched their servers. I had not spoken to the press. I had not even sued them yet. All I had done was step away. Calyx 9 was a building held up by a few critical pillars, and Trevor had taken a sledgehammer to one of them because he didn't like the way it looked. Now that the roof was caving in, he was blaming the pillar for not being there to catch the debris. I typed a reply, then backspaced. No, engaging with him was a trap. Any word I said could be twisted. Then the emails started coming. They weren't from Trevor. They were from the head of HR, a woman named Sarah, who had sat silently in the room while I was fired. Subject: consulting proposal. "Dear Madeline, we would like to offer you a temporary consulting contract to assist with the transition of the data room credentials. Rate is $200 per hour, capped at 20 hours. I didn't reply. 30 minutes later, subject: urgent revised proposal. "Madeline, management has authorized an expedited rate, $400 per hour. We just need you to come in for one afternoon to re-authenticate the root certificates." They still didn't get it. They thought this was a negotiation about money. They thought I was holding out for a better hourly wage. They didn't understand that you cannot buy back integrity with a consulting fee. Another hour passed. I drove to a park near the bay and ate a sandwich, watching the ships move slowly across the water. Subject closing bonus. Madeline, Trevor has authorized a flat fee of $50,000, payable immediately upon the successful unlocking of the data room, plus a retroactive vesting of your stock options upon the deal closing. Please call us. The situation is critical. The desperation was palpable. The numbers were climbing a ladder of panic. $50,000 to walk back into the office, type in a password, and save Trevor's career. It was a lot of money. A month ago, I might have taken it. A month ago, I might have thought it was my duty to save the team. But then I remembered the walk to the elevator with the security guard. I remembered the way Trevor looked at his stopwatch. I remembered the feeling of being reduced to a biological inconvenience. If I went back now, if I took their money and fixed their mess, I would be validating everything they did. I would be saying that it was okay to treat employees like cattle as long as you wrote a check when you got caught. I put the phone down on the bench next to me. I was waiting. I wasn't waiting for a higher number. I was waiting for them to admit the truth. I wanted an email that said, "We were wrong. We violated your dignity. We are sorry. But corporations do not apologize. They only transact." And then, the tone shifted. It was late afternoon when my phone lit up with a message from Holly. "Do not answer them." It was in all caps. Holly never used all caps. "What is happening?" I typed back. "They are in the war room," Holly replied. Trevor, the general counsel, and the new IT guy. I walked past the door. They didn't see me. "They aren't talking about hiring you anymore." "What are they talking about?" "They are talking about bypassing you." "They can't," I wrote. "The encryption is biometric. They need my fingerprint or my retina scan to generate the master key." "They know that," Holly said. I heard Trevor say something about legacy documents. He asked if they could take the Q&A documents that need your signature, backdate them to last month, and copy-paste your digital signature from an old PDF. I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice water. This was no longer a dispute about employment law. This was forgery. This was criminal fraud. "Are you sure?" I asked. "I saw the screen," Holly said. "They had a Photoshop window open. They had your signature scan from the employee handbook acknowledgement. They are trying to slap it onto the Hawthorne and Gage compliance verification form." I sat very still. The wind coming off the bay was cold, but the chill I felt came from the realization of how far they were willing to fall. They were going to forge the signature of a terminated employee on a federal compliance document to push through a merger. If they did that, and if the deal closed, I would be liable. When the audit eventually happened, and it always happens, investigators would see my name on documents dated after I had been fired. I would be the one facing fines. I would be the one facing jail time for securities fraud. Trevor was not just trying to save himself. He was building a frame, and he was about to put my picture in it. I picked up my phone. I navigated to the email app. I did not reply to HR. I did not reply to Trevor. I forwarded Holly's text screenshot included to my personal secure cloud. Then I opened a new email draft. Recipient Marianne Quill. I hesitated. This was the nuclear option. If I told the buyer that the seller was planning to forge signatures, the deal wouldn't just pause, it would detonate. The SEC might get involved. The FBI might get involved. Calyx 9 would be investigated down to its subatomic particles. But if I didn't warn them, and my signature appeared on those documents, I was complicit. I had to protect myself. I typed a single line to Marianne. "Ms. Quill, I have reason to believe that unauthorized attempts may be made to utilize my digital identity to validate documents post-termination. I formally declare that I have not signed, approved, or reviewed any material since Tuesday at 9:26 a.m. Any appearance of my signature after that timestamp is fraudulent." I pressed send. I watched the progress bar slide across the top of the screen. Sent. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the park. I stood up and brushed the crumbs from my lap. Trevor wanted to talk like an adult fine. We were done talking. Now, we were going to court. The notification from Holly arrived at 6:14 in the evening. It was not a text message this time. It was an image sent through an encrypted messaging app, the kind that self-destructs after viewing. I opened the image. It was a photograph of a computer monitor, taken at a sharp angle, likely from a phone hidden under a desk. The glare of the overhead lights obscured the corner, but the center of the screen was crystal clear. It was a view of the Calyx 9 data room interface. My eyes scanned the lines of the document log. I saw the file name, Global Data Privacy Policy Addendum, version 4. Next to the file name was the status column. It glowed with a green checkmark, and next to the checkmark was the approval field. Approved by Madeline Rivera. Timestamp. Today. 4:30 p.m. I felt the blood drain from my face so fast it made me dizzy. I sat down hard on the edge of my sofa. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, hard rage. I was sitting in my living room. My laptop was closed. I had not logged into the Calyx 9 system in 4 days. I had no access. My credentials were dead. Yet there was my name, digitally stamped on a legal document, validating a policy that I had never read, on a date when I was no longer employed. Holly's text followed a second later. Jason from IT is in the server room. I heard him talking to Trevor. They forced a token reset. They are manually editing the user logs to make it look like you signed off on the pending items before you left. They are backfilling the approvals. I stared at the phone. This was not just a lie anymore. This was not just a toxic workplace issue or a wrongful termination case. This was felony fraud. They were fabricating the digital identity of a compliance officer to mislead a public company during a $350 million acquisition. If Hawthorne and Gage relied on that signature to close the deal, and if a data breach happened later, I would be the one in the crosshairs. The investigators would look at the logs. They would see my approval. They would ask why I signed off on a defective policy, and when I said, I didn't, they would point to the timestamp. Trevor was not just throwing me under the bus. He was tying me to the tracks and driving the train himself. I did not hesitate. I did not call a lawyer first. I did not call Holly back. There was no time. Every minute that false signature sat in the data room was a minute I was exposed to criminal liability. I opened my laptop. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I drafted a new email to Marianne Quill. This was not a confidential inquiry response. This was a legal cease-and-fire flare. Urgent unauthorized use of digital identity, I wrote in the subject line. Dear Miss Quill, I typed, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. It has come to my attention that documents within the Calyx 9 data room are currently being marked as approved by my user account with timestamps generated after my termination date. Please be advised that I have had no access to the system since Tuesday morning. I have not reviewed, approved, or signed any documents since that time. Any record indicating my approval after my departure is fraudulent and is being generated without my consent or knowledge. I am preserving this communication as evidence. I hit send. The gravity of what I had just done settled over me. I had just accused the management team of Calyx 9 of forgery directly to the people buying them. I expected a delay. I expected Marianne to consult with her team, but the reply came in 3 minutes. Ms. Rivera, Marianne wrote, we are aware. Our automated audit tools flagged a discrepancy in the metadata of the approval logs approximately 1 hour ago. The user token used to sign the document did not originate from your usual IP address range. It originated from the server room console at Calyx 9 headquarters. We have suspended all due diligence activities immediately. We are deploying an independent forensic investigation team to secure the logs. Thank you for your confirmation. Do not communicate with Calyx 9 management regarding this matter. She knew. They had been watching. The tamper alert from earlier in the week must have triggered a heightened monitoring protocol. When Trevor and Jason tried to ghostwrite my signature, They walked right into a digital tripwire. My phone rang. It was Trevor. I looked at the screen. I knew I shouldn't answer. Marianne had just told me not to, but the anger in my chest was a physical weight. I wanted him to know that I knew. I wanted to hear the sound of a man who realizes he has dug his own grave. I slid the icon to answer. "Madeline," Trevor said. His voice was unrecognizable. It was low, raspy, and vibrating with a terrifying intensity. "What did you do?" "I did nothing. Trevor," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I am sitting in my living room." "Marianne Quill just called the chairman," Trevor hissed. "She said there is an allegation of fraud. She said someone told her the signatures were faked. Why did you email her?" "Because you used my name," I said. "You put my name on a document I didn't read. Did you really think I would let you send me to jail to save your bonus?" "We were just cleaning up the paperwork," Trevor shouted. The facade of the professional executive shattered completely. "It was administrative. We just needed to clear the queue so the deal could close. You are destroying everything. You have to fix this. Madeline, you have to email her back. Tell her it was a misunderstanding. Tell her you authorized us to sign for you as a proxy. If you do not, this whole company goes under." "I cannot help you," I said. "You have to," he screamed. "I will sue you for breach of contract. I will sue you for sabotage." "Trevor," I said, cutting through his panic with a voice as cold as the grave. "You forged a compliance signature during a federal audit. You are not going to sue anyone. You just turned an employment dispute into a criminal investigation. Get a lawyer." I hung up. I blocked his number. I sat there in the silence, listening to the pounding of my own heart. It was done. The bridge wasn't just burned. The canyon it spanned had collapsed. Inside Calyx 9, the implosion was swift and violent. Holly kept me updated through the encrypted app, her messages arriving in a staccato rhythm of disaster. "Legal just stormed into the server room," she wrote. "The general counsel is screaming at Jason. He is shouting that he isn't going to prison for a timestamp." 10 minutes later, "The CFO just left the building. He didn't take his briefcase. He just walked out the side door and got in his car." 20 minutes later, "HR has locked their office door. They aren't answering knocks. Trevor is in his office alone. The blinds are drawn." The company was eating itself. The departments that usually work together, legal, IT, operations, were now turning on each other, desperate to distance themselves from the fraud. The general counsel knew that if he didn't report the forgery, he would be disbarred. The IT staff knew that if they admitted to hacking the logs, they would be unhireable, and everyone knew that Trevor was the architect. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. I felt a strange sense of detachment. It was like watching a demolition I had scheduled, but didn't have to supervise. I had a contract sitting on my counter, the offer from Red Mason Systems. I picked up a pen. While Calyx 9 was dissolving into a puddle of panic and recriminations, I turned the page to the signature line of the Red Mason employment agreement. I signed my name, Madeline Rivera. It was the only time that day that my signature had been used legally. I took a picture of the signed page and emailed it to David at Red Mason. "Accepted," I wrote. "Ready to start Monday." I was moving on. I had a new job, a higher salary, and a company that didn't track my bathroom breaks. But I knew the story wasn't over. The deal between Hawthorne and Gage and Calyx 9 wasn't just dead. It was a crime scene, and crime scenes require a coroner. I didn't know it yet, but the final act wouldn't happen in an email or a phone call. It would happen in the boardroom, the board of directors. The people who actually owned the company were about to land their private jets. They were coming to see why their $350 million payout had vanished into thin air, and they were going to ask to see the logs. They were going to see the bathroom spreadsheet. I poured myself a glass of wine. The storm was raging outside, and for the first time in weeks, I was perfectly dry. The news broke on a Sunday evening, which is the worst possible time for a corporate crisis because it gives the rumors 12 hours to fester before the markets open on Monday. It started on the Silicon Ledger. a niche but influential financial blog read religiously by venture capitalists and day traders. The headline was not sensational, but it was damaging. It read, Calyx 9 acquisition faces headwinds amidst compliance officer departure and internal control questions. The article did not mention the bathroom spreadsheet. It did not mention the forgery. It was vague, citing anonymous sources who claimed there was a significant culture clash and irregularities in the data room logs, but in the language of mergers and acquisitions, irregularities is a polite word for disaster. By Monday morning, the phone lines at Calyx 9 were melting down. I was not there to hear them, but Holly Serrano was. She was in the room when the internal investors, the venture capital partners who had poured $40 million into the company over the last 5 years, demanded an emergency board meeting. They did not want to wait for the quarterly review. They wanted answers immediately. They wanted to know why their $350 million exit strategy was suddenly being discussed on financial blogs as a risk. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. Holly, as the operations lead responsible for running the presentation technology, was inside the room. She was my eyes and ears. She set up her phone to record the audio, tucked discreetly behind a pile of non-disclosure agreements, and later that evening, I would listen to the recording with a glass of wine in my hand. It played out like a Shakespearean tragedy performed by men in Italian suits. The recording began with the sound of shuffling papers and the nervous clearing of throats. Trevor Klein was the first to speak. I could hear the artificial confidence in his voice, the kind of tone a man uses when he is trying to sell a car with a leaking engine. Gentlemen, and Ms. Quill, Trevor began, I want to assure you that the rumors circulating in the press are baseless. We are currently undergoing a strategic realignment of our compliance resources. The pause in the due diligence process is merely a procedural hiccup as we migrate to a more robust continuity matrix. We are optimizing our workflow to ensure a seamless transition post-acquisition. It was a masterclass in corporate gibberish. Realignment, continuity matrix, optimizing workflow. He was throwing buzzwords into the air like confetti, hoping they would distract everyone from the fact that the building was on fire. There was a pause. Then, the voice of Marianne Quill cut through the room. Her voice was not loud, but it had the sharp, metallic quality of a scalpel. Mr. Klein, she said, we are not here to discuss continuity matrices. We are here to discuss facts. And the fact is that my team has identified a critical breach in your chain of custody. It was a technical glitch, Trevor said quickly. A software error. It was not a glitch, Marianne countered. We have the forensic logs. We know that an attempt was made to backdate approval signatures on Friday evening. That is not a software error. That is manual interference. The room went silent. I could hear a chair scrape against the floor. The investors were shifting in their seats. Forgery was not something they had signed up for. We are investigating that, Trevor stammered. It may have been a rogue employee. Let us put the signature issue aside for a moment, Marianne said. Let us go back to the source. The root cause of this entire breakdown is the sudden termination of your chief compliance officer, Madeline Rivera. We need a clear, truthful answer. Why was she removed from her post 40 days before closing? This was the moment, the pivot point. The chief financial officer, a man named Marcus, who had always been terrified of conflict, tried to step in. I could hear the tremor in his voice. Madeline left voluntarily, Marcus said. She decided to pursue other opportunities. It happens. People burn out. If she left voluntarily, Marianne asked, her voice dropping an octave, then why did your security system trigger a tamper alert the moment her account was disabled? And why did you attempt to transfer her root privileges by force instead of through a standard handover protocol? Marcus fell silent. He had walked right into the trap. If I had resigned, I would have handed over my keys. I would have sat with the new admin and transferred the certificates. The tamper alert proved that the transition was hostile. It proved that I had been cut off without warning. We had a disagreement regarding management style. Trevor interjected, trying to salvage the lie. It was a performance issue. We felt she lacked the necessary discipline for the next phase of the company's growth. Discipline, Marianne repeated. That is an interesting word. Ms. Rivera had a perfect audit record for 3 years. She managed the SOC2 certification without a single exception, and yet, you fired her for a lack of discipline in the middle of a sale. There were behavioral concerns, Trevor said. He was digging deeper. Time management issues. We hold our staff to high standards. Mr. Klein, one of the board members spoke up. It was Arthur, the representative from the lead venture capital firm. He sounded impatient. We are losing money every minute this meeting continues. Hawthorne and Gage has paused the deal. Their legal team is asking about fraud. You need to tell us exactly what time management issues justifies firing your key gatekeeper right now. Did she miss a deadline? Did she lose data? It was cumulative, Trevor said, his voice thinning. It was about efficiency, loss of productive minutes. Be specific, Marianne demanded. She was frequently away from her desk, Trevor said. We tracked significant periods of non-work activity. You mean breaks? Marianne asked. Frequent breaks, Trevor corrected. Excessive breaks. The room was quiet again. The tension was thick enough to choke on. The investors were confused. They were expecting to hear that I had embezzled money, or that I had leaked secrets. They were not expecting to hear about breaks. Then, a new voice spoke. It was a board member who had remained silent until now. I recognized the voice as Richard, an older investor who usually spent his time on his yacht. Trevor, Richard said slowly, I received an email this morning from an anonymous source. It contained a photo of a clipboard. I stopped breathing. I pressed the phone closer to my ear. What clipboard? Trevor asked. The panic in his voice was raw now. It appears to be a spreadsheet, Richard continued. It has Ms. Rivera's name on it, and it lists times, 6 minutes, 8 minutes, 7 minutes. Richard paused. When he spoke again, his voice was filled with a mixture of disbelief and disgust. Trevor, please tell me I am misinterpreting this. Please tell me that the executive management of this company is not physically tracking the bathroom habits of its senior leadership. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum. It was the sound of $350 million evaporating. It was an efficiency metric, Trevor whispered. An efficiency metric, Richard roared. You fired the woman holding the keys to our acquisition because she went to the bathroom too much, and you wrote it down on a clipboard. It sounds ridiculous when you say it like that, Trevor said weakly. It sounds like a lawsuit, Arthur shouted. It sounds like a human resources nightmare. Do you have any idea what Hawthorne and Gage will do with this? They are a Fortune 500 company. They have strict ESG policies. They cannot acquire a company that treats women like assembly line robots. We were saving money, Trevor insisted, but he was shouting into a hurricane. Every minute costs $2.40. You idiot, Richard yelled. You just cost us millions. You didn't save $2. You burned the whole building down. Marianne spoke again. Her voice was calm, cold, and final. Gentlemen, she said, Hawthorne and Gage has a zero-tolerance policy for toxic workplace environments. We also have a zero-tolerance policy for the falsification of records to cover up such environments. Based on what I am hearing, and based on the evidence of the clipboard which I have also seen, I am recommending to my board that we terminate the acquisition agreement immediately for cause. You can't do that, Trevor pleaded. We have a term sheet. The term sheet has a clause for material adverse change, Marianne said. Discovering that the COO is running a biological surveillance operation on his staff is the definition of a material adverse change. We are done here. I heard the sound of a chair being pushed back, footsteps heading toward the door. Marianne, wait, Trevor shouted. Do not follow me, Marianne said. My legal team will be in touch regarding the breach fees. And Mr. Klein, I suggest you stop counting minutes and start counting the years you might be facing for that signature forgery. The door slammed shut. On the recording, the chaos erupted. Board members were screaming. The CFO was crying. Someone was throwing something against the wall. I stopped the recording. I sat in my living room, the silence of my apartment a stark contrast to the cacophony I had just witnessed. Trevor had wanted to optimize the company. He had wanted to trim the fat. He had wanted to eliminate waste. He had succeeded. He had eliminated the deal. He had eliminated the revenue. He had eliminated his own career. The clipboard had come back. I had carried it out of his office as a badge of shame, but I had thrown it back as a boomerang, and it had hit him right between the eyes. I took a sip of my wine. It was a cheap bottle, bought before I signed my lucrative new contract with Red Mason, but as the liquid settled on my tongue, I thought it tasted better than any champagne they would have popped at the closing party I was never invited to. The board knew. The buyer knew. The world was about to know. There was only one thing left to happen, the fallout. And I knew, with the certainty of a compliance officer who has read the regulations, that the fallout would be total. The final act of the Calyx 9 tragedy did not take place in the press or in the break room. It took place inside the executive boardroom on the 42nd floor, a room with a panoramic view of the city that Trevor Klein had always claimed symbolized his vision. Now, it was the setting for his arraignment. I was not in the room physically, but my presence was heavier than anyone sitting in the leather chairs. I knew the details because the forensic report, which was eventually filed as part of the public disclosure for the failed acquisition, became a matter of record. The meeting began at 9 a.m. on Tuesday. Exactly 1 week after I had been escorted out of the building, the atmosphere was described by the corporate secretary as funeral. The entire board of directors was present. The legal counsel for Hawthorne and Gage was present via video link, and sitting at the far end of the table, isolated like a virus in a petri dish, was Trevor Klein, the independent director. A woman named Eleanor, who had served on 10 Fortune 500 boards, opened the proceedings. She did not waste time with pleasantries. She asked for the governance evidence to be presented. The head of human resources, who had been hiding in her office for 3 days, walked forward. She was carrying a plastic evidence bag. Inside the bag was a clipboard. She placed it on the polished mahogany table. It landed with a dull clatter that echoed in the silence. It was the same clipboard Trevor had slammed onto his desk the day he fired me. The neon yellow highlighter marks were still visible. The calculations of $2.40 were still circled in red ink. In a room where billion-dollar decisions were made, this cheap piece of office stationery looked obscene. It was a physical manifestation of petty cruelty. "This item," Eleanor said, her voice shaking with controlled rage, "was recovered from the office of the Chief Operating Officer. Mr. Klein, is this your handwriting?" Trevor stood up. He adjusted his tie, a reflex of a man who still believed he could talk his way out of gravity. "It was a productivity optimization tool," Trevor said. His voice was thin, lacking its usual boom. "We were identifying leakages in paid time. I was merely ensuring that the company received the labor hours it was paying for. It is standard efficiency tracking." "Standard?" Eleanor cut him off. "You are telling the legal representatives of a global conglomerate that Calyx 9 tracks the biological functions of its employees. You are telling us that you monitored the bladder capacity of a 36-year-old woman and recorded it on a spreadsheet." "It was data," Trevor insisted, sweating now. "It was just data." "It is harassment," Eleanor snapped, "and it is a liability that has exposed this board to lawsuits we cannot win." Then, the screen at the end of the room flickered. It was Marianne Quill, speaking from the Hawthorne and Gage headquarters. "If I may," Marianne said. Her voice was amplified, filling the room with the cold authority of the buyer. "The clipboard is disturbing. Mr. Klein. It speaks to a culture of toxicity that Hawthorne and Gage will not absorb. But frankly, toxic culture is something we can fix with new management. What we cannot fix is criminal intent." The room went deadly quiet. "My team has completed the forensic analysis of the data room logs," Marianne continued. "We requested the original server tapes from your third-party hosting provider. We compared them with the user activity logs provided by your IT department." On the screen, a slide appeared. It showed 2 timelines. The top line shows the activity of Madeline Rivera's user account, Marianne explained. You can see that her access was revoked on Tuesday morning. However, on Friday afternoon at 4:30, a document titled Global Data Privacy Policy was approved by her digital signature. Trevor looked at the screen. He said nothing. The metadata shows that this approval did not come from Ms. Rivera's laptop, Marianne said. It came from a terminal inside the Calyx 9 server room. The IP address matches the workstation logged into by the Chief Operating Officer's administrative credentials. A collective gasp went through the room. This was the moment the ground opened up. You tried to ghostwrite a compliance certification, Eleanor said, looking at Trevor with horror. You used the identity of a terminated employee to validate a federal document. We needed to close the deal, Trevor shouted, his composure finally snapping. It was just a signature. The policy was fine. Madeline was being obstructionist. I did what I had to do to save the shareholders' value. You committed fraud, Eleanor said, and you dragged this entire board into it. Marianne's voice came back, final and crushing. Hawthorne and Gage is formally invoking the termination clause of the acquisition agreement for cause. We are citing material breach of trust, falsification of due diligence records, and failure to maintain internal controls. We are also forwarding these logs to the Securities and Exchange Commission for their own review. The deal is dead. Ladies and gentlemen, we are not buying a crime scene. The screen went black. For a moment, nobody moved. The weight of $350 million vanishing into thin air was a physical pressure in the room. Then, Eleanor looked at the corporate secretary. I call for a motion to terminate Trevor Klein for cause, effective immediately, and to strip him of all unvested equity, she said. Seconded, said 3 voices at once. All in favor. Every hand in the room went up. Mr. Klein, Eleanor said, you are relieved of your duties. Security is waiting outside to escort you. And Trevor, do not touch a computer on your way out. Trevor looked around the room. He looked at the men and women he had promised to make rich. They were not looking at him. They were looking at their phones, frantically texting their lawyers. He walked out of the room alone. There was no severance package. There was no golden parachute. There was only the long walk to the elevator, escorted by the same guard who had walked me out 7 days earlier. The collapse that followed was swift and brutal. Within 48 hours, the valuation of Calyx 9 plummeted. The news of the fraud investigation leaked to the press, and this time, it wasn't a rumor, it was a headline. Tech company deal implodes over fake signatures and bathroom spying. The 2 enterprise clients, the logistics giant and the healthcare provider, didn't just freeze their contracts, they canceled them entirely, citing the reputational risk of associating with a vendor under investigation for fraud. That wiped out 40% of the company's recurring revenue in a single afternoon. The CFO resigned 3 days later, citing health reasons, though everyone knew it was because he had signed off on the financial projections that were based on the forged documents. The engineering team, realizing their stock options were now worth less than the paper they were printed on, began to exit in waves. The headhunters were circling like sharks, picking off the best developers one by one. Calyx 9 did not shut down immediately. Companies rarely die instantly. They rot. They spent millions of dollars on legal fees to fight the breach of contract fines from Hawthorne and Gage. They spent millions more on a forensic re-audit of every document in their history. The savings Trevor had calculated, the $2.40 he thought he was saving by timing my bathroom breaks, had cost the company nearly $50 million in realized losses and hundreds of millions in lost potential. While Calyx 9 was burning, I was starting my first week at Red Mason Systems. The office was bright, filled with natural light and the low hum of productive collaboration. My desk was by a window. On my second day, around 10 in the morning, I stood up, I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I chatted briefly with a project manager about the weather. Then, I walked to the restroom. I did not look at my watch. I did not rush. I washed my hands slowly. Looking at myself in the mirror, I looked rested. The dark circles under my eyes were fading. When I returned to my desk, nobody looked up to check the time. Nobody was holding a stopwatch. Nobody had a spreadsheet open to calculate the cost of my bladder. David, my new boss, walked by. "Hey, Madeline," he said. "Great job on the audit framework draft. When you have a moment, let's grab coffee." "Sure," I said. "Give me 5 minutes." "Take your time," he said, and he walked away. Take your time. It was such a simple phrase, but after the last month, it sounded like a benediction. I sat down and opened my laptop. I saw a news alert pop up in the corner of my screen. Calyx 9 faces class action lawsuit from former employees over lost equity. I closed the notification. People often ask me if I feel guilty. They ask if I regret destroying a company that employed 200 people. They ask if I went too far. I tell them the same thing every time. I did not destroy Calyx 9. I did not plant the virus. I just refused to be the host. Trevor Klein built a house of cards. He built it on fear. He built it on micromanagement. And he built it on the arrogant belief that he could treat human beings like components in a machine. He thought that if he squeezed us hard enough, he could extract every last drop of value. He forgot that people are not machines. We have breaking points. And when you build a system that relies on silence and submission to function, you are building a bomb. I didn't light the fuse. I just stopped using my hands to hold the structure together. I stepped away. And when I stepped away, gravity took over. The house collapsed because it was designed to fall. And as for me, I am doing just fine. I have a job I love, a team that respects me, and a bladder that is no longer a line item on a balance sheet. The bathroom is down the hall, to the left, and I go whenever I want. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on whether Trevor got what he deserved. If you enjoyed this tale of corporate karma, please make sure to subscribe to Boss Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story get heard by more people. Your support means the world to me.